Engineer James Anderson gripped the brake lever with both hands, his knuckles white, his face drenched in sweat. The locomotive beneath him was accelerating downhill, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, he could do to stop it. 1878 was the year that revealed a terrifying truth about America's railroad expansion. Before computer-controlled braking, before air brake systems became mandatory, there was Saluda Grade, a 3-mile stretch of North Carolina track that became the most feared piece of railroad in American history. A mechanical death trap that made even the bravest engineers refuse to work the line. When it opened in 1878, the railroad established strict procedures based on other mountain lines. Descending trains couldn't exceed 10 miles per hour, needed fully functional brakes, required a brakeman ready for manual braking, and carried emergency sand. These rules echoed procedures from Pennsylvania's mountain divisions, Western Maryland's grades and Norfolk, and Western's Blue Ridge operations. But procedures were written by administrators, not by men piloting multi-ton locomotives where physics created an impossible equation. Engineers working mountain grades from West Virginia to California developed their own rule. Say your prayers at the top. James William Big Jim Anderson, a veteran engineer assigned in 1880, had worked challenging Appalachian grades from Virginia coal country to Tennessee lumber routes. He'd operated everything from 440 Americans to powerful 280 consolidations on grades across eastern mountain ranges. He'd watched locomotives derail on Pennsylvania's Allegheny grades and seen brake failures on Virginia's mountain divisions. Anderson took one look at Saluda's profile and said something legendary. "That ain't a railroad, that's a gamble with the devil, and the devil's got loaded dice." The story of Saluda Grade begins with a problem crippling the post-Civil War South's economic recovery. By the mid-1870s, America's railroads were exploding, from 30,000 miles in 1860 to over 160,000 miles by 1880. The Transcontinental Railroad had linked the coasts in 1869. Railroad companies were racing to conquer mountain ranges across the continent. But there was a bottleneck strangling the Southeast, the Blue Ridge Mountains, separating South Carolina's agricultural wealth from Tennessee and Kentucky's industrial markets. Mountain railroads across America were pushing limits everywhere. The Central Pacific had conquered the Sierra Nevada with snowsheds and switchbacks. The Denver and Rio Grande threaded through Colorado's Rockies. The Baltimore and Ohio mastered the Alleghenies with powerful new locomotives. Engineers were learning across the Appalachians, Cascades, and Rockies that steep grades required careful calculation of locomotive power, train weight, and critically, braking capacity. The railroad companies saw the straight line through Saluda Mountain and calculated profits. What they failed to calculate was the cost in human lives. Enter the Spartanburg and Asheville Railroad. This wasn't just about laying tracks. This was about challenging established engineering principles developed through decades of mountain railroad experience. Conservative engineers warned that grades exceeding 4% violated safety margins. They'd studied Swiss Alpine Railways, Austria's Semmering Railway, and America's Georgetown Loop in Colorado. They called the proposed route suicidal. But expansion advocates pointed to newer, more powerful locomotives from Baldwin, Rogers, and the American Locomotive Company. They had shareholders demanding returns and competitors threatening rival routes. So they did something that seems almost criminally reckless. They built it anyway. The finished grade would climb 606 feet in just 3 miles, a sustained 4.7% gradient. To understand how extreme this was, consider other famous American mountain grades. The Horseshoe Curve in Pennsylvania maxed out at 1.8%. Georgetown Loop in Colorado operated at 4%. Sandpatch Grade topped out at 2.8%. Tennessee's Cranberry Grade reached 3.2%. Tehachapi Loop peaked at 2.2%. Most European mountain railways ran between 2 to 3%. Saluda was going to be steeper than all of them and operate as a mainline freight route daily. When it opened in 1878, the railroad established strict procedures based on other mountain lines. Descending trains couldn't exceed 10 miles per hour, needed fully functional brakes, required a brakeman ready for manual braking, and carried emergency sand. These rules echoed procedures from Pennsylvania's mountain divisions, Western Maryland's grades, and Norfolk and Western's Blue Ridge operations. But procedures were written by administrators, not by men piloting multi-ton locomotives, where physics created an impossible equation. Engineers working mountain grades from West Virginia to California developed their own rule: say your prayers at the top. James William Big Jim Anderson, a veteran engineer assigned in 1880, had worked challenging Appalachian grades from Virginia coal country to Tennessee lumber routes. He had operated everything from 440 Americans to powerful 280 consolidations on grades across eastern mountain ranges. He had watched locomotives derail on Pennsylvania's Allegheny grades and seen brake failures on Virginia's mountain divisions. Anderson took one look at Saluda's profile and said something legendary. "That ain't a railroad, that's a gamble with the devil, and the devil's got loaded dice. But here's something that will blow your mind." The most important safety innovation didn't come from Baldwin Locomotive Works or Pennsylvania Railroad's technical bureaus. It came from Luther Red Murphy, an Irish immigrant track foreman who had worked railroad construction from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, and his contribution was the safety track. About 2/3 down Saluda, he built a siding angling uphill from the main line. The switch was spring-loaded to automatically route any train moving faster than 15 miles per hour onto this siding, forcing the runaway uphill until friction and gravity stopped it. Similar safety sidings were soon copied on other dangerous American mountain grades. On paper, it sounds crude. In practice, it saved dozens of lives. But the safety track was an admission of failure, announcing that locomotives would regularly lose control. The fundamental problem was thermal physics meeting mechanical limitations, a challenge plaguing mountain railroads from Switzerland to Colorado. Every locomotive descending Saluda faced the same nightmare that engineers on Sandpatch, Cranberry Grade, and California's mountain divisions knew too well. Gravity pulled trains downhill with roughly 100,000 pounds of force. Engineers applied George Westinghouse's revolutionary compressed air brakes, patented in 1869 and rapidly adopted across American railroads, creating friction between cast iron brake shoes and steel wheels. The physics became unforgiving. Brake shoes convert kinetic energy into thermal energy. At 400 degrees Fahrenheit, friction coefficients drop. At 600 degrees, brake materials carbonize and glaze. At 800 degrees, wheel metal softens and deforms. Railroad engineers from Pennsylvania to Southern Pacific documented this phenomenon. The heat can't dissipate fast enough, and once that thermal cascade starts, catastrophic failure begins. Anderson and experienced mountain engineers developed interval braking, controlled accelerations, and heavy braking, allowing wheels to cool between applications. This technique, refined on challenging grades from the Alleghenies to the Sierras, required calculating heat dissipation, understanding momentum, and split-second timing. Perfect judgment, perfect timing, perfect equipment. Any factor failing meant disaster. And then there was the curve at the bottom. Most mountain grades like the Feather River route to Tehachapi Loop or Tennessee Pass descend into straight track. Saluda ended in a sharp curve with a 15 miles per hour limit. A locomotive hitting that curve at 40 miles per hour would immediately derail. Mountain engineers across America called similar curves by the same name, Judgment Day. Then came the disasters, a pattern repeated on dangerous grades from the Rockies to the Appalachians. The worst weren't spectacular crashes making headlines. They were quiet near misses happening weekly on mountain divisions across America, where locomotives screamed down with smoking wheels. Those never made newspapers, but they terrorized the men who experienced them. The first major disaster came in 1880. Engine 41, a Baldwin 280 consolidation, the workhorse powering American freight railroads coast to coast, was pulling freight when its Westinghouse air brake developed a leak. Engineer Thomas Fletcher, a Pennsylvania coal country veteran who'd worked mountain grades across the Alleghenies, felt pressure dropping and began emergency procedures. Sand lines, reversed engine, manual brakes. None of it was enough. Engine 41 accelerated past 30 miles per hour. Fletcher jumped. The fireman jumped. The brakeman jumped. Engine 41 hit the curve at 45 miles per hour, derailed, and rolled down a 70-foot embankment. The railroad filed it under equipment failure. Brought a runaway that became legend across American mountain railroads. A 22-car freight with engine 63 stalled halfway up. The engineer tried backing down for a running start, but backwards momentum became uncontrollable. The safety track couldn't catch backwards trains. Engineer William McBride stayed at the controls, trying desperately to brake. He and his firemen rode that locomotive backwards down 3 miles, hit the curve, and derailed. Miraculously, both survived. After each disaster, the railroad investigated, issued new procedures echoing reforms on Sandpatch, Cranberry Grade, and other challenging divisions, and declared problem solved. But Saluda didn't care about procedures. It cared about physics. The math was brutal. On a 4.7% grade, every 100 tons generated 9,400 pounds of continuous downhill force. Standard brake systems, even advanced Westinghouse air brakes, could reliably dissipate heat on grades up to 3%. Beyond that threshold, proven on mountain grades worldwide, thermal buildup exceeded cooling capacity. Saluda asked locomotives to operate 50% beyond thermal design limits every single run. The disasters continued. 1889, 9 casualties. 1891, passenger train saved by safety track with seconds to spare. 1894, cars crash into locomotive. 1903, total brake failure. Engineer survives through luck. By 1910, Saluda earned a reputation across the American railroad industry as the assignment nobody wanted. The railroad offered danger money just to staff trains. The breakthrough came from necessity as locomotive technology finally caught up. By the early 1900s, Baldwin and American Locomotive Company produced more powerful engines incorporating lessons from mountain railroads worldwide. Newer air brake systems from Westinghouse with faster response. Improved brake materials with higher thermal limits. More powerful 282 Mikados and 210-2 Santa Fe types that could maintain speed uphill without straining. But the real game changer was public perception. After a 1907 incident injuring passengers, newspapers ran exposés comparing Saluda to other dangerous grades. The Interstate Commerce Commission, established in 1887 to regulate American railroads, launched investigations. Insurance companies threatened unsustainable premiums. The railroad implemented real reforms based on principles adopted across mountain railroads, from the Appalachians to the Cascades. Multiple safety tracks, helper engines on all freight runs, maximum tonnage limits calculated from actual thermal capacity, weather descent bans, premium wages. The disaster rate dropped. Not because Saluda became less steep, physics doesn't compromise, but because operations finally matched engineering reality that mountain railroads learned through decades of hard experience. Eventually, Saluda became economically unviable as American railroads declined against trucking and highways. The interstate highway system offered mountain alternatives. Norfolk Southern closed Saluda through traffic in 2001. The tracks remain, rusting in North Carolina mountains. The locomotives are gone, scrapped decades ago. But mountain railroad engineering worldwide learned from Saluda. Every modern safety regulation, every grade limit calculation, every brake system thermal analysis incorporates hard-won lessons from Saluda and challenging grades from the Rockies to the Alps. Saluda Grade represents when American industrial ambition crashed into fundamental physics, revealing the true cost when economics overrides engineering principles, a lesson learned repeatedly across American railroad history. Those engineers weren't heroes volunteering for danger. They were working men forced to gamble with their lives because the alternative was poverty. For 123 years, Saluda stood as a monument to a fundamental question asked on every mountain grade from the Alleghenies to the Rockies. Just because we can build something, should we? Thermodynamics and friction provided one answer through derailments and disasters, but economics demanded another. They built it anyway, and dozens of men paid the price with their lives.